Last we have seen that the domestic market must be adjusted in order to face the globalization of the financial system. It's not only a globalization for financial institutions or financial markets, it's a globalization for all the sectors, for all the economic sectors. Then we have seen that after this market has been subject of some kind of adjustments, we have seen at least that many countries have delayed the process of financial system globalization. Delay, demora, it means that many countries want to be global. Many countries want to operate in the global market, but by several reasons they have decided to delay this globalization. And which is this reason? We have seen that these countries or this region have had crisis. And as they have had crisis, it means that they have affected other countries. And they were affected because they were global. As they have opened their market, the consequence is that the crisis of other countries affect their operations too. And this is something that is not valid for us. While we will be global, if we will be affected by the actions, by the activities, by the crises of others. I want to obtain benefits from globalization. I don't want to obtain risk, threats, problems. Then I prefer to take my measures. I try to take defensive actions in order to protect my country. By this, we have a delay. By this, the world is not so globalization as we expected. It's not a topic from this course, but if we see the word globalization, the degree of this globalization is nearly the 23 to 18% of the total operations. If we are speaking about telephone, only 5% of this phone calls are international. If we are speaking about internet, you can see Facebook, you can see Twitter. They are a communication alternative that help people to be global. In this case, if you don't have the cost of transport, then it would be very globalized. Must be a very globalized service. It's not. It has only 14–50% of globalization. The most part of this communications is within the country. Then the globalization is not so big as people said. But on the other way, countries delay this operation, this process, because they want to protect their markets in order to be not affected by globalization. I prefer to close my markets. I prefer to operate only my markets. I prefer that my entities, my enterprises operate in my market, and I won't be affected, or perhaps it's better to say I wouldn't be so much affected as I would be globalized. I prefer to close my frontiers in some degree, not in all the ways. By this, I have told you we have a delay in the process. On the other side, many countries have again a process of integration and increasingly exposed to internal and external economic shocks. We have regions, the European zone, NAFTA, Mercosur, and so on. And these markets are integrated, are regional markets. Regional markets is only item within the process of globalization. It's not globalization. It's only one process, one of the widened kinds of process that we could have about globalization. And as they have opened their markets, they are affected by internal and external shocks. Every country has their internal shocks, like us, that we could be ill. Okay, it's our internal shock. And our internal shocks affected us. And if we are an important partner from other countries, we could affect these other countries too. And if we are only one country of our region that has an open market, then we can infect the other countries too. So our internal shock could affect other countries because we will buy less than before to our partners, because we will sell less than before to our partners, because we have interaction, because we are interdependent. By this, we have these internal and external shocks, which will affect all the members of this region. This is a consequence of globalization. And what is pity, what is worse, is that we are increasingly unable to predict triggers of such crisis. We know what is a crisis, but nobody can predict when we will have crisis. For example, we have the case of the United States. The United States is recovering right now. But when I was young, as you, in the 70s, for example, in those years, we know that the United States has a big debt, a big internal debt, and a big external debt. Nowadays, their debt is accounted in trillions of dollars. We know that they, with this amount of debt, would have difficulties in the future to pay their debt. And you can explain this because if you see their gross national product and yet you compare their debt, it would be explode in some time in the future. But the big question is when. They have had a big crisis in the year 2007 that it was exported to all the world. We are living the consequence right now. It's not ended. But they are recovering their growth, and we are not. So all our knowledge, all our economic knowledge is not enough to know what will happen, when will happen a crisis. We know that the United States will have a big crisis in the future, but when? It's a big question. And if we don't have the knowledge, if we don't have the capacity to determine when will happen something, then you need caution, precaución. You need to see things not so quickly. It's better to advance slower. By this, we have a delay in this process of globalization. But at the same time, globalization has produced some other kind of services or consequences that we have not before it. First one, internationalization. I have told you that internationalization is to be present in many countries. And globalization is the same but with interdependence, with interaction. Securitization. I have explained you what is securitization. Is a service by which you could obtain credits at lower cost in better conditions. And in some cases, it allows you to obtain credits. Perhaps you couldn't obtain it without securitization. But securitization is a service that is not easy to control. And by this, the crisis of that has begun in the year 2007 has begun under securitization operations. And when we operate in many countries, internationally or globally, we have these operations of securitizations that are backed in financial instruments from many countries in different currencies. And this is the explanation about why we can't control or monitor in a well way what will happen with this operation, why we will lose money, why these operations are called risky, because it's impossible to know all what is happening in many countries, because I could have a portfolio from many bonds, from many notes, from many countries, from different sectors, from different entities, and then I need to know a lot of information, not only from many countries, but I need information in addition from many economic sectors, from many enterprises, and in some cases I don't know which notes, which bonds are backing a securitization operation. And finally, we have here derivatization. And when we are speaking about derivatization, we could say that derivatization has been more necessary because we are operating in many countries. And what is derivatization? Perhaps you have heard about forwards. Forward is a financial service that secures you the price of money exchange in a future date. So today we want to know at which price we will buy or sell dollars, for example, dollars, in 6 months. And someone will fix a price for us today, and we will buy it in 6 months. Okay, this is, for example, a forward. We have a swap. In the case of a swap, they will offer us right now a spot price, precio al contado. We will exchange right now our money with another money. But at the same time, we agree to do the same operation in the future. But for example, right now I sell soles, and in the future I will buy soles, the inverse operation. And right now, as I sell soles, I buy dollars, and in the future I sell dollars and I buy soles. So the inverse operation. Okay. And when we are global, when we are international, then many entities, many companies are operating in many countries, and then we need more derivatization operations. We have on the other side options. In the case of options, you don't have the obligation to sell or to buy, but the financial institution has the obligation. You have only the alternative to buy or to sell, and you can decide not to buy or not to sell. But if you want to buy, the financial institutions must sell. If you want to sell, the financial institution has the obligation to sell. In this case, the financial institution will charge a commission for this service. With these instruments, and there are many others, with these instruments, you can assure a money exchange in the future. But at the same time, you can assure an interest rate with swaps, forwards, or options. In all these cases, as with money exchange rates, you can assure an interest rate. So you can know what will the cost of your borrow in the future. So this is consequence of globalization.
Teacher,
Yes.
it's the same to internationalization with mondialization. Because I read in other books, mondialization, not globalization. For example, in Spain, it's more known to mondialization.
Okay, I have not heard this word, but I assume that it's the same than internationalization, because the word that means globalization is universally used, has a universal use. Then mondialization should be something like internationalization. But on the other side, perhaps it's a Spanish word, no? It's mondialization. Yes, But on the other case, if we are speaking about mondialization, or mondialización, perhaps it's better to say, because in Spanish, because in English it would be something like worldization. Okay, mondialización, in some sense, could mean that we must operate in all the world. But operating in a world doesn't mean necessarily that we have interdependence. So another condition is that we must have interdependence. If mondialization implies interdependence, then it's another way to say globalization. That we must meet what are the characteristics of mondialization in order to know if it's only internationalization or if it's globalization. In the last 30 years has been a liberalization in the bank sector and financial innovation. Financial innovation is related with securitization and derivatization. They were new operations. They were operations that have begun in the services that has been offered in the 70s. Okay, before it, no one has used it. So we can say we are facing an innovation service. But liberalization is something that has begun in the 1980s in the United States. Under the government of Ronald Reagan, Americans have thought that financial institutions could auto-regulate their operations. They thought that if you want to operate in a sustainable way and for a long term, or forever, we could say forever, then you will auto-regulate your operations. And you will do so because you don't want to fall in bankruptcy. So you will determine which is your maximum risk, you must determine what is your minimum cash, you must determine many variables that are necessary to manage in order to operate for a long term in a sustainable way. And perhaps it's something that we could say is right, perhaps, in some way, some sense. But the consequence of this is the crisis of the year 2007. They have decided that, for example, financial institutions wouldn't be supervised by the SBS, in their case, the Fed. And by this entities has run higher and higher risk with securitization. The Fed or the SBS has not analyzed this kind of operations. They have checked only the traditional operations, but only in a superficial way. The consequence, an international crisis. In this case, this crisis has begun in the United States, but it could have begun in every other country, because if you go to England or to Germany or France, they were doing the same kind of operations. But it has begun, the crisis, the bad position in the United States, by several reasons. Then, after the world has liberalized this sector, they have determined, they have accepted, they have reconsidered this decision that they said, okay, we need to control the financial system because every economical sector depends from the financial system. Everyone has accounts, everyone pays salaries, do their payments, everyone has their savings. And if you want or are looking for a credit, you are looking for these institutions to obtain this credit. And if they are in bankruptcy, who will finance your operations? Okay? Then it's necessary to maintain these entities under control. And it has changed the previous point of view of liberalization. But they have said, okay, we will control these entities, but we wouldn't control it in all their items. It wouldn't be a narrow point of view. They must maintain a wide, free possibility to operate. We will control only some variables that are substantial to maintain them in a controlled risky level, controlled risky level. So regulation right now, for example, determine that these entities must have a risk-related capital adequacy requirement. Capital C, adequacy R, requirement R. Okay, CAR. Capital adequacy requirement. And what does it mean? They said a financial institution needs to have a minimum capital to maintain their operations. How must we determine which is this minimum capital? Because these institutions are running three kinds of risk. Credit risk, because they are lend money. Operative risk, because they do operations. And market risk, because credits, because money exchange, because some other kind of services under commissions or fees that are synonymous are services that their prices could change with market trends. Then we must estimate how much can we lose in credits or in operations or in market changes. In the case of operations, if our software falls, if we have a virus in our software, if people don't do well their control, if people try to theft money, internal people, employees, or external people theft, or if we don't control that our client has signed a contract, and as they don't sign the contract, they don't want to pay because they know that they don't have signed the contract and we have disbursed some funds to them. These are operational risk. In the case of credit risk, I estimate that he or she or this entity could pay, and I was wrong, they can't. I estimated that I have a good collateral. A collateral is a warranty. And this warranty, I thought that I could sell it in 1 million. And when we have the default, we can't sell in this price. The market price is lower, very, very lower. And we will see in chapter 5 many other cases about credit risk. And I must estimate how much I could lose with credit risk. And finally, with market risk. I, for example, lend you a credit, an amount at 10%, and after I have disbursed this amount, you fall in bankruptcy or your credit risk is higher. Then I have lent you an amount at 10%, assuming that you are a risk. And right now, in 2 days, 1 month, 3 months, your risk is very, very higher because it's happened something, an external factor has happened or an internal factor has happened that you and I have not expected. And it has changed the situation in a very, very big way. In consequence, I am running a higher risk, but I am only gaining 10%. With this risk, I must charge perhaps 25. With 25, I will be compensated by this risk. But with 10, I'm not. I am running a bigger risk. And in this case, if it's an external reason that has changed this situation, it means that many companies are in the same situation. So what I can lose is a lot from many, many countries. From many debtors. Okay? So I must estimate the risk, how much could I lose, and your capital must be the addition of the risk that the risk that I have to lose money by market operations, by credit operations, or by operational or in an operational way. And I must estimate how much could be this lose. And this addition must be lower or equal than my capital. If my capital is lower, the SPS will say, increase your capital. If you can't increase it, they will stop your operations. They will close your company. We have deposit insurance scams. We are some of the countries who apply this insurance. Many countries don't have insurance scams. And what is an insurance scam? If the financial institution in which you have funds fall in bankruptcy, then the BCR will pay you, will return you your deposit. If your deposit is no more than 93,000 soles, so you have an insurance, you don't pay for it, and you are assured by the BCR. It's not the BCR, it's an institution that is managed by the BCR, okay? And it's a fund, insurance fund for deposits. And these insurance funds will protect you if this financial institution falls in bankruptcy. Then, it's something that is very important for you. I don't know if you have your savings in Banco de Crédito, Banco Continental, Scotia Bank, Interbank, the big four financial institutions of our countries. Perhaps you have there. Why? Because you think they are very solid. I am protected there. And you will receive for your deposit 0.50%, 2%, no more than this. Because I think you have not fixed deposits. Perhaps you have saving accounts. And they will pay you a very insignificant interest rate. Only because you think it's a solid institution. But with this insurance scam, you can save your money in entities that are very, very risky. And they will pay to you 6%, 7% for the same kind of deposits per year. Do you prefer to maintain your deposits in Banco Continental, or do you prefer to maintain your deposits in this institution? If you want, vamos a decirlo en castellano, si ustedes quieren regalar dinero al banco, es cosa de ustedes, pero su profesor lo necesita más, acepta su regalo. Then, think in this. It's better, it's in your case, and for many people, better to invest or save in these institutions, in cajas municipales, rurales, or financieras. It's better because you are protected if your funds are less than 93,000 soles. If you have more, then you can see for another institution, 93 in one, 93 in another one. And you will gain more, okay? And another regulation, overexposure, sobreexposición. We have rules that prohibit overexposure. In this case, for example, I can't lend more than 30% of my effective equity to a economic sector. In this case, they are working by diversification. The SBS said us, don't lend all your money to one economic sector. You need diversification. If an economic sector falls, you have your loans diversified in many other economic sectors. This is the first thing. Another economic group. You can lend your money to economic groups, but no more than 30% of your effective equity. If this economic group falls, you have less money to other economic groups. For example, what is an economic group? Grupo Romero, Grupo Brescia, and so on. If you lend money to a company, no more than 50% of your effective equity. And in this case, it's important to say, what is the effective equity? You have heard equity, patrimonio, but what is effective equity, patrimonio efectivo? It's an estimation and re-estimation, una nueva estimación of your equity. In this case, the SPS determines your accounting equity and then will add and subtract amounts related with your loans and deposits. And when they do so, they will estimate if you have lent to these entities, then your risk is this amount. You must apply a rate to these loans, and after you have applied this rate to this amount, you will determine that you have a risk. Then you will subtract this to your accounting equity. And in the case of deposit, you must do the same, and you can add this to your equity. This is the game. And this result is called the effective equity, patrimonio efectivo. Finally, foreign exchange risk. In the case of foreign exchange risk, we must think about this in this way. We have national currency and foreign currency. In our case, dollars, for example, and nuevos soles. Financial institutions are entities that exist to lend money and to obtain deposits. On the other way, they have a letter of guarantees, they have a letter of credit, cartas de fianza or cartas de crédito, and similar other services. But their essential service is related with lending and borrowing money from the market. Then, if you try to speculate, you will buy and buy. For example, right now you will buy and buy dollars. And when you buy and buy dollars, you will have a lot of dollars in your assets and perhaps no $1 in your liabilities or few dollars. Because you are speculating, you are expecting that the dollar will grow, will rise. I expect this, for example. Then all what I have, I want to have it in dollars. But you are speculating that this is not your business. If you do so, perhaps you could get a loss. But if things are not as you have expected, you can have a big lose. And this could explain a bankruptcy. Then the SPS established limits. For example, if you have $100,000 or $100 million in your assets, 100 million in your assets, then in your liability, you could have no more than 105 or no less than 95%, 90. So a variation of 5% over or 5% down, and no more than this. If you maintain your liabilities within this band, then the SBS will consider that you are not speculating. You are doing your business as every entity in their business. That if you have more, then you are speculating and they can punish you. On the other side, we must have adequate reserve to assure liquidity. Liquidity could be cash. We must think in this way. But reserve is a term that has many meanings in the financial sector and in this course. The first meaning, reserve is an item within the equity, es un ítem dentro del patrimonio neto. Han visto ustedes reserva, cuando han visto alguna vez en estado financiero, por ejemplo, reserva legal, hay también reserva estatutaria, voluntaria y otras más que pueden existir que aquí hablemos. Okay? So, this is one meaning of reserve. And what is a reserve? A reserve is like a provision, not a provision, that I prepare, that I generate to pay non-expected losses. So I take a portion of my year's profit and I register it as reserve. I maintain a percentage of this in my equity, in my business. If in the future I have non-expected losses, I could pay it with this reserve. Okay, this is one meaning of reserve. In this case, I would have this reserve to have enough liquidity to pay these non-expected losses. First meaning. Second meaning, reserve means to cash. It's a synonymous of cash. So I need to have enough cash to pay, to assure liquidity, to pay my debt if I have to pay debt, if I must to pay my clients when they withdraw money. So the second meaning of reserve is cash. Another meaning of reserve is not related with this, but is an opportunity to explain it. You have you have heard about international reserve, okay? Reservas internacionales. This is an item that is managed by the country, by the government, by the BCR. It's not applied here, but it's another meaning of reserve. And finally, we have another meaning of reserve, and it's related in Spanish with encaje. Okay? In this case, we are not speaking about encaje. We are speaking about a reserve as cash or a reserve as equity that a financial institution needs to have in order to maintain their operations. But if we think a little bit about reserve as encaje, we could determine that as encaje, they will assure liquidity too. Because if I have a deposit, I receive 100 million, and the BCR said, you must maintain in reserve, in encaje, 10% of this 100 million, then I can lend this money and I must channelize these funds to the BCR. And these funds will be able to help me if we have a financial panic. If I am facing a financial panic, then the BCR will channelize this reserve that I have accumulated there to a front to pay this financial panic.
Is that reserve apart from the reserve that they have on their balance sheet?
Yes, and the reserve that I have in the balance sheet are related with the profit after I have determined my profit in the result statement. At the end of the year, I have my profit and I determine a percentage of this reserve I must register as reserve. Excuse me, a portion of this profit must be a reserve in my balance sheet. But the reserve of the BCR are not related with profit, are related with clients' deposits. So my client brings a deposit, and a portion, I share 10% and 8% of this deposit, and I put it in the BCR, not in my account. And the BCR maintain, hold this amount in their account, and they will channelize it to me if I am facing a financial panic or a temporary fall of cash, and they will channelize this amount. In this case, this reserve, under the meaning of encaje, will help me to assure liquidity, but not because I am managing it. It's because I am obeying rule, and in this case it's different, but they will help to the liquidity too. So, four exceptions for the word reserve: cash, reserva, encaje, and forget the other one. Cash, reserva, encaje, and reserva internacional. More. In this case, we have provisions. And provisions is like reserva de patrimonio. But in this case, provision is something that I prepare, that I register in my accounting for expected losses. For example, I lend money to my clients and I know that 1.40% of my clients won't pay. Then I know that if I have a portfolio of 1,000 million soles, I know that 1.40% of this amount wouldn't be paid. Probably 1.40%. Then I will constitute a provision to assume this cost, this expected cost. In the case of reserve, it's for unexpected cost, pérdidas no esperadas. And in the case of provisions is for expected losses, pérdidas esperadas. Okay? You have seen provisions when you have a study account, when you are, for example, seeing receivable accounts, cuentas por cobrar, and you have learned, or you must have learned, that you must do provisions. Or if you have inventories, and if these are cyclical inventories, ropa de moda, for example, then this inventories could lose price, and you must have a provision too. So provision is something that you have learned before. Reserve, I know that you have seen it, but perhaps you have not known the sense or why you will constitute reserve. Confidential disclosure rules are enforced, obligatorias, enforced. Confidential, confidencialidad. Financial institutions knows who has money and how much. Financial institutions knows who are your clients, who are your suppliers, who are your margins, operational margins, gross margins, net margins. They know how much is your cost, who are your clients and how much do you sell to everyone. In many cases, what are your prices? So they have a lot of information about you. They know who are your stockholders, so they can sell this information. Many people are interested in knowing who is the owner or who has how much money, or many people, many competitors are very happy or would be very happy if they could know information about you, internal information about you. And the financial institutions have all this information. By this, it's enforced, it's obligatorio, to be confidential, not reveal, not diffuse, not communicate to anyone information about your clients. Only you can diffuse this information to a judge, if you have an order of this judge, or to the SBS, or for financial intelligence. Financial intelligence is a division who is trying to find funds that come from corruption. Or lavado de activos. Pero al final corrupción igual, o sea, incluye todo. La corrupción no solo es del gobierno. So, financial institutions and insurance companies can't diffuse information from their clients. Equity and bonds. They must monitor equity and bonds. In many cases, financial institutions have other institutions to issue bonds or to issue stocks. When they issue these stocks or bonds, in some case or in some sense, they are promoting that others will buy these securities. Securities, acciones, bonos, valores en general, securities. And when you have promoted this, you must maintain. If you are what is called a representante de obligacionistas, you represent all the owners of these bonds, of these debts, or if in the case of equities, if you have in some case guarantee that it's a good operation, or you could rebuy it or some other things, then you must monitor the evolution of the price of these securities, or you must check the evolution of the financial statements of these entities who has issued these equities and bonds. And it's not important that you know it as financial institution. That's not important. What is important is that this knowledge must be subject of public disclosure. You must diffuse this information to the market. And as you diffuse this information to the market, potential buyers and actually holders of these securities could know what is the situation of these documents that you have promoted. And it is necessary that you check this. And it's necessary auditing requirements, auditorías, or controls. Several kinds of auditors. It's not only an an accounting auditory. It could be some other kind of operational auditory and or some other. But we could say, for example, due diligence. And the due diligence in Spanish is debida diligencia. And it's nearly the same, but not the same as what is many years ago was called diagnóstico de empresa. Perhaps with diagnóstico de empresa you can have a better idea of what is it. I need to know how is this enterprise. Like an ill person, I must analyze it and determine which are the problems, what are the potentials, and so on. I must diffuse this information if I have this obligation, as I have promoted this equity or bonds to the market. Only this way. Only this way I am not obliged to confidential disclosure. In this case, I have signed a contract, an agreement, and I have law that oblige me to diffuse this information in order that the market, that the financial market, that the stock market, that potential investors and actually holders could know what is happening in this market or with this documents. And to add comparison, ayudar a la comparación. Accounting and disclosure rules are harmonized. Everyone must follow the same principles. Everyone must follow the same kind of financial statements presentations. Not only in our country, other countries are coordinated by in this way in order that everyone could present their financial statements in the same way, perhaps in their own currency, but in the same way. In this case, I can compare my financial statements with the financial statement of other countries. The general trend is to establish a set of rules to manage assets and liabilities portfolio risk effectively. This is what we are looking with these measures that I have explained you and the previous that we have seen in the previous slide. How to manage asset and liabilities portfolio with low risk. Or if I am running high risk, that I will be compensated with a high return. It doesn't mean when I am managing risk, it doesn't mean that I must not run a risk. What I must is, if I am running a high risk, I must obtain a higher return. If I am running a lower risk, I could obtain a lower risk, and in both cases, this return must compensate my risk. It must compensate in a well way. It must be enough to assure that if I have losses, these losses will be covered by my profits. This is the logic. And all these rules and other rules could be summarized in three rules, only in three. And with these three rules or three variables, I could have quantitative and quality control over these operations, and at the same time I could have a guidance that have replaced or that have been replaced with price, interest rates. If we are speaking about financial and insurance companies, we are speaking about interest or fees. These are their prices. If I control these prices, if I control the interest rates, if I control the commission, then I could determine like a yield curve, okay? And in this case, what will we do? The BCR, the central bank, will establish, for example, the reference interest rates for different terms. And when they establish this, we will have a yield curve that will be the reference to other interest rates that must be applied in all the country for this currency for different terms or for different levels, risk levels. On the other side, we must orient all our rules with to monetary policy. In this case, we could say that the central bank must regulate the monetary mass in order to maintain the inflation in some level, or they must determine other rules like reserve. In this case, reserve is encaje, in a determined level that will help us to maintain our enterprise or our financial enterprises in healthy level. And finally, general regulation. This is a very wide concept. With general regulation, we are managing all the spectrum of alternatives. So we will manage, for example, salaries, the minimum salary, we will establish taxes, and so on. With this general regulation, we could promote internationalization, securitization, and derivatization. And all these rules that I have explained you have consequences when I apply all of them. And what are these consequences? What are the BCR, the SPS trying to obtain with all the things that they are doing? What is the trend? Manage assets and liabilities portfolio risk effectively. We have seen that with all these rules, they have limits, they have guides about to whom they could lend money, how much, and from whom they could obtain funds. They can concentrate loans or concentrate deposits from sectors, from persons, and so on. They must apply an interest rate level to their markets. So we will have an effective risk management. This is the consequence of this management, this asset and liabilities management. When I manage in manage assets and liabilities in a good way, then in that line, or as a consequence, I am managing the portfolio risk. Then, if I have those two, so the international financial institutions will have an appropriate balance between risk and return. And this is logical, because I have established a good level between assets and liabilities. Then assets and liabilities are the components of the balance sheet. And then I have balanced this balance sheet, and this balance will establish that I have an adequate equilibrium between risk and return. When I have this, I have a very healthy financial statement, un estado financiero sano. It's very solid, and the risk of bankruptcy is very low. Then depositors will be protected, and as depositors will be protected, they could save more money in these entities. They could be they could feel safety in this case, and they could bring more funds to these financial institutions. And when they bring more funds, the other consequence is that they will increase the funds that these financial institutions are managing. And when they increase these funds, we have more funds to finance more investment in the country. So we can assure an economic growth. And as these depositors will be protected, stockholders earn a suitable return, un rendimiento adecuado para los accionistas. And in this case, stockholders will receive this because as the balance sheet is well balanced, as we obtain an adequate profit, and they have to invest again an adequate equity capital, then they will receive a return that will pay them for their risk, and they will be satisfied from this. They will receive a low return or a very high return. They will receive only an adequate return. And they have minimized the risk of destabilizing crisis. If we have a good management of asset and liabilities, they have a good equilibrium between their accounts and the risk and return, and my depositors and stockholders are protected, then if we have crisis, it means that I could have a lower profit, I could have less cash, I could have less deposits, perhaps I could have a higher default when I try to recover credits. But as I have managed all these items with caution, then crisis won't affect me in a high degree, and financial institutions will maintain their operations. If we think in the Peruvian case, in the crisis that has begun in the United States in the year 207, and has reached our country in the year 209, we could say that our financial institution has supported this crisis very well. No one of them has fallen in bankruptcy. In the United States, 2/3 of their banks, or nearly the 75% of their banks, have fallen in bankruptcy. The same in Europe. But in our country, is one of the countries, only few countries have not bankruptcy, have not financial institutions bankruptcy, because we have followed this rule. Remember that we are following this rule because we are following the Basilea rules, the Basilea agreements, and we have not invented them. It's not obligatory for us, but we have applied them extremely more than their creators. And by this, the effect over our economy or over our financial institutions was very, very low. And the consequence of this minimizing of risk is that capital will be more efficiently allocated. When I invest or when I lend money, they will be allocated, colocado, in alternatives that are low risk. Then this is the consequence of this rule. I don't need, as a monitoring institution, as the SPS or as the BCR, I don't need to control all the operations. I don't need to say, do only these operations and not the other. And if you do so, report me at every minute what are you doing. No, I don't need to control all things. I only need a framework, marco. And when I prepare this framework and you operate within this framework, all the financial institutions will operate in a good way. It doesn't mean that we have zero, that the risk of default is zero. No, it doesn't mean it. It means only that we have reduced the risk a lot, but it's not zero. By this, for example, we have had last year the bankruptcy of Caja Municipal of Pisco, and 2 years ago another entity has fallen in bankruptcy too, but not by a crisis. It's only because they have an individually bad management of their assets, and when they have this bad management, all this sequence has been corrupted and they have fallen in bankruptcy. Causes of international banking structure. When we analyze financial institutions have a structure, an organizational structure. They will prepare their structure in some ways. They will have different kinds of offices in the country, out of the country, and so on. And by this, they must determine how to structure their company. And what are the causes, what are the variables that will influence over this decision? You can see that all are related with profit. All are related with profit. And profit is a consequence of economic factors, law, strategy and taxes that are affecting this financial institution. Suppose that you are a financial institution and you want to open another office in another country. You must decide if you must open a branch, if you want to open a subsidiary, an agency, or perhaps you prefer to operate with a correspondent bank, a bank that will represent you, but it's not yours. So you have many ways. Or with a representative office. A representative office is not officially an office. It's like a vendor that you have in another country that represents you, but he can't receive money in your name, and they can lend money in your name. They only will look for clients, and they will channelize through other financial institutions the deposits to you, or if they approve a credit, they will channelize the credit from your financial institution through other financial institution, and they will disperse this amount to this client. Then, if you must decide how you must enter to this other country or to this other city within your country, and so on. You must determine economical factors. If in this country, for example, if this country is in a growing trend, then the probability to do better profits is higher because they are in expansion. And when they are in expansion, the most part of the companies are increasing their sales. And when they are increasing their sales, they will have cash and they could pay. If you lend money to them, the probability to recover this amount is higher as they were in recession. Because in recession, sales are falling, debts are increasing, they have less cash, and you could have problems. Or you must determine in economic sectors how is the per capita income. And if the per capita income is very low, people don't have the capacity to acquire things, or they could acquire only few things or the most necessary things. If you go to this country, you couldn't have a big business. It's better to think in a smaller business or to be present with only an agency or with a rep office. It's not necessary to invest a lot in a branch or in a subsidiary. These are economical factors, and you must determine these economical factors to determine if you will be present in this country with a branch, subsidiary, agency, rep office, corresponding banking, and so on. And you must analyze it and what is their impact over your profit. At the same time, you must analyze the law. And when we are speaking about the law, it's interesting to think in Thailand. In the case of Thailand, the law don't allow that you open a branch office or a subsidiary there. You could only be present there with a rep office. Then it's a restriction that you must take in account and then analyze it with a rep office. It's enough for you to open and to be present there. Or in the case of Peru, in the years 70s and 80s, in the case of Peru, our law has said, if you are a foreign bank and you invest here and you have a capital, you can lend to the market only the same amount that you have in capital, no more than this. So if you have a capital of 100, your loans could be only for 100. And in those times, domestic banks could have a capital of 1 and they can lend 23. With this proportion, domestic banks have a big advantage over you. Because if you want to compete with them, if you want to compete in the market, obtaining a big share of the market, you need to invest a lot. And if you invest a lot, you are reducing your profit. Because you will operate only with your own capital.